allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Trustee Harper?
Here.
Trustee Germain?
Here.
Trustee Petrucci?
Here.
Trustee Kalani?
Here.
Treasurer Harding is absent. Clerk Hopkins here. Supervisor Fountain?
Here.
We have a quorum of the board. We also have present Township Manager James Wickman.
Thank you. Item number 4 is approval of our meeting agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Trustee Petrucci. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Call to the public. Mrs. Fountain, how are you this evening?
I wanted to thank all of you for continuing to support the Next Door Hartland Teen Center. We will be starting our 3rd year this fall. Our directors are really eager to get back and see the kids. We've hosted an average of 30 kids a day, and there are some kids that come every single day. And they've really found a home there, and I want to thank you very much and the Hartland community for helping to support that. That's really wonderful. We just had a fundraiser this weekend for the Teen Center, and that was at the Majestic Golf Course. We raised almost about $7,000 for that. We had wonderful support from the community, from small businesses, from various doctors and dental groups. It was very, very well supported, and just wanted to thank the Hartland community for that too. Thanks.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I know you guys started doing a summer program this year.
We were hoping to.
Oh, you didn't?
We didn't have enough funds to do that. Currently, the students come to the Teen Center, and it doesn't cost them anything. We just have to have the emergency information and internet waiver signed, and then they can attend for free. And that's to you guys. Thank you. This summer we didn't have enough funds, so it was going to have to be on a pay basis, and we did not have enough paying teens to be able to make that work this summer. So hopefully next summer we'll be able to do that. That's why we're continuing to try to raise funds and things like that. The kids have done things like made dog biscuits and given them to the Humane Society. They did face painting for the Creekside Elementary Fun Fair. They had the float in the Memorial Day Parade and took first place. They were very proud of that. We had 30 kids walking along in the parade for that. There's a lot of different things that they've been doing, and it's really turned into becoming a very teen-driven place, and they're really starting to take some good leadership roles. So it's a really wonderful place. We don't have any ways to measure its success. I think in the years to come, I think the students will ultimately be successful, and I think the Teen Center was part of that.
Great, thank you.
Don't walk away. Because on behalf of Hartland Township, I would like to thank you for all of the hard work and drive that you portray to the board to keep that thing going and starting it up, making sure everything's running right on a daily basis, working with the kids. And there's not a lot of people that would put their whole lives into a project like you have done. And on behalf of the Hartland community, I'd like to thank you for doing that. A few of us on the board play a little part in that, but you are really the driving force behind that. So thank you very much.
Well, the Hero Board is amazing, and I can't thank them enough. There's no way this could have happened without a team effort, and they've been absolutely amazing. Joe and Matt and Joe, you guys, and as well as everybody else on the Hero Board. This was just one really great project because it was great people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is approval of our consent agenda.
So moved.
Support. Motion by trustee Petrusi, second by trustee Harper. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We have no pending business this evening. Under new business, we have a road millage. We have a report back from the task force. Again, thanks to those folks who spent months putting together a program for us to consider a road millage that would be, if we decide that this evening, would be on the ballot in November. Manager Wickman, would you like to open up any discussion or any thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just very briefly, the plan, after deliberating last week, the task force did not make any changes to the plan. They appreciated the comments that came in, and they thought that more often than not, the feedback continued to be in support of the most recent plan, and so that's what's before you. Probably the only thing worth noting in the millage language itself, because it's pretty standard what you have to do and include in the question and how the words have to go, is that this millage, should it be approved by residents in November, would appear on their tax bill right that December 1st tax bill. That's slightly different than what we had done in 2010 with the language where it said if they had approved it in 2010, it wouldn't be collected until 2011. In this case, we're recommending that you consider the language that's there now, so it would be collected right away if the voters approve it, and that would help cash flow and get projects going faster. If the board would prefer to have that delayed, you can do that and change the language here to do that. I just want to acknowledge that that is a slight difference from when you put the question on the ballot in 2010.
How much would that cash flow be from that first collection? And is the collection over the two payment periods or just the one?
You just on the winter tax, and that would be $873,000, what we estimate the first year's collection would be.
Okay, so if we had to wait, we would be waiting another whole year.
Correct.
Before we could actually begin the work.
Well, we could, for the projects that we were planning to bond, we could potentially still get going next year. It just, we pay in more interest costs. There's a lot of, by having the cash flow start now, we're able to reduce how much we have to bond. We're able to pay less interest over time. It just means we can get going with the project sooner, and it ends up costing less for the taxpayers in the long run. So I don't know that it's really that big of an issue. I just want to, be perfectly transparent about that this isn't exactly this type of millage question that was posted in 2010. If there are no objections to it, we would offer the resolution that you have in front of you based on the recommendations from the task force.
Any thoughts from the board as to when the collection would start?
I don't have any problem with it starting in 2015. People are voting for it, know what they're voting for.
It would start this year.
It'd start this year. It's payable into February.
Right. You get the invoice
right, yeah,
year,
right,
you pay it in 2015.
Yes, correct.
Unless you pay before the end of the calendar year.
Yes.
Any other thoughts?
Yes, resolution.
If there's no other comments, I'll entertain a resolution.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution approving submission of road maintenance and improvement millage to the two electors.
Support. Motion by trustee Kalani, second by trustee Harper. Is there any other further discussion?
I have a question. The Exhibit A that's attached to it ends with a question mark. Was that still pending the calculations by Finance Department?
This is one long run-on question that would, this is the exact language that would be on the ballot, and it's a question posed to the voter that they answer yes or no to. So, way back up about 8 lines, it starts with the word shall, as in the interrogatory. The 873 is going to be an estimate, just because that's the nature, that taxable value can change.
So you can say the 2014 calendar year because we have are we talking our fiscal year or the
2014 calendar year? That would be, what would happen is, should the voters approve it on the November 5th? No. 4th day. If they approve it on November 4th, at our November 5th meeting, the next day, we would have, one of the action items would be a revised L 4029 for the millage to be levied, and the board would have to approve it that day so that it'd be effective for the December 1st tax billing.
I have a question. Was the date that it would be implemented discussed with the committee?
I don't know that we who was at the last meeting? I don't think that had been discussed. I mean, we certainly talked, when you say implemented as far as the collection, we certainly talked about doing projects in the first couple of years, I guess.
And was it discussed 2014 or 15?
We didn't talk about it.
Was it assumed 15? The reason I'm bringing this up is because ultimately this is going to be decided by the voters, and we know that. However, during the year, banks collect escrow money to pay people's taxes. And if we implement this thing as of 2014, most of the people, I would assume, are going to have to come up with additional money because their escrow is going to be short whatever this amount is, because they haven't been collecting that through 2014 from the banks.
They're going to have to do that anyway.
No.
In 2015, it will be.
Well, in 2015, by the time it's due next year, they would have collected.
But how good are banks at knowing that the millage rate went?
Right. They only know when they're...
When they get the tax bill, when they get the tax bill, they pay through the escrow. It could short people.
It will. I think you're right. It will, but it would also short people next year, because the way the bank finds out that there's an additional... most people don't tell their banks. It's only when they get a deficiency.
No,
they readjust the escrow in the following year.
Banks check the taxes every year. That's how they know if they're short or over. And
do they do it a year in advance, so they collect the... It's not been my impression that the banks are always on top of if there's a change in the millage rate, that somebody ends up... I mean, you raise a valid point, and it may be a reason to consider.
Like for me, I don't pay in the escrow. I just pay when I pay my tax.
Well, I understand that a lot of people don't do it that way, but I do it that way myself.
Right.
A lot of people don't.
But my point is that I remember this coming up one time in my property taxes, and it was short because there was an increase in taxes. And it wasn't until the following year when they evaluated that I was short, because the bank gets notified that I was short, and they tell me there's a deficiency. Then what they do is they recalculate, and then they add a little bit more onto that calculation, so they're collecting more. There's always a little bit left in that escrow account.
They get a tax bill in February. It's due by February.
Right.
That tax bill is going to have this added on there.
Yes.
They haven't collected for that yet, so they're going to be short.
Yeah, but what they're saying is that if you push that back a year, they're still not getting that tax bill until the next February.
Exactly.
They're still going to be short that year, too. The banks don't proactively...
I see what you're saying.
That's my point. It doesn't matter when they get... No, but you're always going to be... Because the evaluation of...
And I don't know the answer to that question, whether or not banks know of the millages and so far. I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that.
I've not understood that they are.
Yeah.
And it'll be...
But I would hate to have somebody get a letter from a bank saying that they're short, and they double that.
Well, that's
make up, so I would hate to have that happen, that's all. It's just a point. It's ultimately going to be left up to the voters.
Any other comments or questions? Being none, will have the clerk please call the roll?
Supervisor Fountain?
Yes.
Clerk Hopkins, yes. Treasurer Harning is absent. Trustee Kalani?
Yes.
Trustee Germain?
Yes.
Trustee Harper?
Yes.
Trustee Petrucci?
Yes.
Resolution carries.
Thank you.
Just another call out to the task force. They did a great job in putting it all together and informing the public, the staff in particular, having the information, answering the questions, getting when there was something that the task force didn't know or a citizen didn't know, getting the information back out there. I just don't know what more we could have done to at least get the facts out to the public in terms of what this means and what it could mean for Hartland Township and the residents of Hartland Township. I will say, hopefully, people recognize the fact that, at least from my perspective, I have a couple cars. I've put a lot of money into repairing my cars because of the way the roads are in this county, not just in Hartland Township, but in the county. And the county needs to step up and figure out what they need to do to solve some of these problems. And so do our state legislators. Going home and not ruling on making a decision on road funding, I think was a huge mistake. And it's too bad, absolutely too bad yesterday that we didn't have more choices on our ballots, because I think we got to throw some of those bums out, because, to be honest with you, I think they hide behind things when they should be solving problems. And that's my opinion. I'm stick to it.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Next on our agenda is board reports. We were in our first meeting in August. Trustee Kalani?
I just said my piece.
Well, you had another chance. Trustee Harper?
Bill report.
Trustee Germain?
I just want to compliment the clerk's office on another well-run election. I was there late in the day yesterday, and everyone was still alert and functioning and operating as a cohesive team. And it does well to the residents of the township to have that type of interaction with the paid people that are there. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Petrucci?
I do not have a report tonight.
Clerk Hopkins?
I would just like to thank my workers. They're the ones who make it work and they have the interaction with the people. It's nice when they hear from voters, thank you for putting in the time. It's a long day. You know, the polls are open for 13 hours. They got to be there before that to set up, and after that to tear down and balance all the numbers. And I'd like to also thank several of the board members here for helping out with the setup and the tear down. That's greatly appreciated as well. It lets me concentrate on the tasks at hand on Election Day. So thank you very much.
Okay. Just so the board does know, I sent out a thank you letter to all the people on behalf of the board for that task force. So they're all going to get a thank you note from all of us. I did sign it, but it's from all of us. Again, thanks. You said it very well. That they did a great job. Manager Wickman, do you have any updates this evening?
Just briefly, this clipboard is going to be a regular attender of our meetings with me. We've talked about trying to encourage the board to come out and attend, whether it be coming to one of our regular staff meetings or really any event where we're out as well promoting the brand. We want to be more active and making you aware of those opportunities, and it's a little sign-up thing, and if there's any dates on there that you think you can come to a morning staff meeting or having a potluck or what have you, we'd be happy to have you join us. I'll just pass it around, and if you have questions about them, let me know. But we'll try to get you better information to get plugged in. Our goal, if you recall, was to maybe try to have opportunity for board members to make at least one of our staff meetings a year, if your schedule would allow that. And so this maybe is one way to help you do that. Otherwise, I really don't have any major highlights from the operational reports. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
There are no questions. We'll move on to...
I do have a question about this.
Sure.
The township staff meetings, since three of our members that sit on this board would likely be at those, if one of us that are not here today, would that would make it
Supervisor doesn't necessarily attend the staff meetings. The clerk and treasurer are there.
Okay. I guess.
So he'd be in a rotation with the rest of you, so I don't think we'd
So
be...
basically, you're looking for a sign-up, so it wouldn't accidentally turn into something you go down and post as a meeting.
Right. And it would only be that if you were potentially deliberating toward a decision. If you're there as observers and guests, that's... but I don't see a situation where we have that many there anyway.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 11. This is information and discussion. We'll start with Bob West, our Public Works Director, with a presentation on water readiness and to serve presentation. This is a follow-up to a meeting we had probably been 2 or 3 months ago now.
Well, no, I'm sorry. This is actually a strategic plan goal that we talked about a bit at the board retreat about the development readiness. How ready are we with our water infrastructure for the potential areas of development? I'll let Bob get in more detail on that. You want me to turn you?
James,
plug you in there?
Be able to...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
While we're waiting, I do want to thank Bob and his staff for the work that they've put into this. There's a healthy document certainly there in front of you, and a lot of work and really studying that went behind that. It's by no means a comprehensive study, and the numbers are estimates, but it really puts us in a position to have those conversations, with potential developments. So with that, turn it over to you. I think the idea of putting some slides up is you do have a lot of meat in that report, and recognize kind of lose the forest for the trees sometimes. So the slides were just to try to give a summary level discussion. If for some reason, there we go.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity here to present to you what we're calling the Readiness to Serve study with regards to the Hartland Township water system. This again is a summary of the actual report that you have with you. This is geared more towards future developments, and so our current water system, just to give you a little background, is made up of approximately 24 miles of distribution water mains. They range in size from 4-inch to 16-inch. Our standard minimum distribution water main is 8-inch. However, we do have some 4-inch private water main that runs in certain areas of the township. In addition to that, we also have 4.34 miles of service leads, and that would be the pipe that essentially goes from the water main to the actual building. 246 fire hydrants and approximately 616 service connections. Our current water system is registered with DEQ, and essentially what it's made up of is 3 source water wells, and that water then is filtered through 2 filter vessels. The DEQ rates what they call the firm capacity, which is the equivalent of taking your largest source water well out of service, and the remaining water that you're able to produce is considered your firm capacity, and that's your rating that you're allowed to basically produce. So in this particular case, looking at the source wells, the well that is permitted at 0.88 million gallons a day actually is the one that they rate the firm capacity as that one being offline. Unfortunately, what happens when we get to the filters is we have 2 filter vessels of the same size, so taking either one of those out of service essentially reduces our filtering capacity 50%. So that's where the firm capacity ratings come from, and based on those firm capacities of 1.5 million gallons a day, we can serve approximately just over 5,500 water REUs. That's the equivalent of that many REUs. The filtering capacity is less than that because, again, that firm capacity rating, even though when both filters are in service, we can filter 1.72 million gallons a day, the firm capacity rating only allows for approximately 3,300 water REUs to be filtered. And that's, again, the MGD is million gallons per day. So our current water system, what we have on file is approximately 3,127 water REUs are currently sold. Of that number, 1,678 water REUs are currently in use, being that they are connected to the water main. Just as a little historical note, 2,629 water REUs were allocated as part of the original water SAD. So this map's a little hard to see, I think, but I try to do the best I can here with color coordination. The properties highlighted in green were taken from the planning department and are identified in the future land use model. The question for this study was, how do we get water to those properties highlighted in green as they are high potential for future development? And so what I've done is basically highlight them. The blue lines are the existing water infrastructure that exists within our township. And then I've also put some topography on there. The topography in Hartland Township ranges quite a bit. You can see the system elevations range from 915 feet all the way up to 1,105 feet. Our water tower base elevation is 1,071.5 feet. And I've highlighted that on the topography, that the lines that are highlighted in red, those are the areas that we're going to have trouble getting water to if the decision is ever made to get water in those particular spots. If I were to zoom in, you can see kind of on the west end here, that's Hartland Estates. And we do have some pressure issues. I believe it's Rotundo Drive where the booster pump station is located. And that's why that's there, because you're actually pushing water uphill into that area that is highlighted in red there. Essentially, for the sake of argument, we'll say 2.31 feet of elevation changes the water pressure approximately 1 psi. So going back to that last slide, we essentially have, just with the range of elevation within the township, there's an 82 psi differentiation. Now that doesn't take into consideration the friction of the pipe or any of the C factors, they call them, or roughness of the pipe, which that's not accurate science. That's simply based off the 2.31 feet equaling 1 psi of water pressure.
Can I ask you a question there for 1 second?
Sure.
So the statement about Hartland Estates,
Yes.
you're not really saying that that water tower is below the elevation of the pipes in the ground at Hartland Estates, are you?
In the red zones they are.
I stand in my house. I'm not looking down at that water tower.
It's a measure from the base of the water tower?
That is the base of the water tower.
Yeah, so it's above the base of the water tower.
Okay. I would be looking down at the base of it, probably, if I could see the base.
And I believe if memory serves me correctly, I believe that red zone in Hartland Estates runs of right around 1,100 feet of elevation, and with the tower being at 1071, you're looking at approximately 29 feet of difference in elevation. So once you factor in the fact how tall the tower is, yes, you're still going to look up at it, and again, 2.31 feet divided by 29 feet, you're not going to see that much difference in pressure between the tower and that particular parcel.
So really, the best place to put that tower would have been right by Hartland Estates? Is that what I understand?
No comment.
There was a lot of discussion about that.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Just for my understanding of the water system, is the area in green the school system that's to the east of US 23? We've got those several blocks.
Pointer here. Are you talking about these properties here?
Yes, I am.
No, that is not the school property. That is what I believe to be is the Bullock Farm at the end of Dunham Road here, if you were to continue up north. The school system actually is this water main right here.
The blue that's already there?
Yes, and that's actually, rather than loop it, they were authorized to run a private system within their actual school grounds. So just about right across the street from Springer Field is where the water system actually goes from public to private. So that little loop there actually goes around a building, and all this is private water main in here.
And if I can just clarify that map again, that goes back to strategic plan board retreat discussions about taking a look at our future land use map and identifying properties that we may want to reevaluate, the density and future land uses. Those parcels highlighted in green are the ones that the planning director sketched or made note of, had some discussion with the planning commission about, focusing in on those for reevaluation. And so it's kind of a concept map we started to use as a starting point for, the areas of next likely dense development. And then just to also clarify, so the red areas are high points. You're going to have problems getting up there. But what you're saying with the green elevation lines is the further we fall, we have the opposite problem of pressure being too high in some of those areas. Is that an issue you're highlighting?
We're getting there.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right.
But yeah, you're absolutely correct. The green is actually the lower pressure areas where we may want to look at it. It's cause for concern as far as to modify the existing system because the pressures would be too high. Just as you go up 2.31 feet and you drop 1 psi, the opposite effect, if elevation goes downhill 2.31 feet, you increase water pressure.
I have one more question. Where is the property that the township currently owns at Fenton Road and Pleasant Valley and M59?
That would be this one here and the one on the south side, the longer portion. So these two right here.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So the first section we'll take a look at is shooting east down M59. The properties, this is just kind of zoomed in. And essentially what we have here, if we were to take the water main to the Tipsco Lake border, it's approximately 3.5 miles. Estimate, and these are very rough estimates, but it's probably in the range of $1.1 million to $1.8 million to extend that water main down to the actual, to the border road. And the reason there's so much different range of cost is our master plan actually proposes parallel 16-inch water mains. But when developers have come in, the current end of the line just past the ice arena or Arena Drive is a 12-inch water main. So it's been proposed to bring that 12-inch line all the way down to, say, our sewer properties if somebody were interested in those. It's something that needs to be discussed as far as do we want to stick to the master plan and encourage those developers to put in a 16-inch main, or is it something that we would be willing to let a 12-inch water main go down there? The master plan, which we'll get into a couple more slides, actually takes into account looping throughout all of Hartland Township with much larger diameter water mains. That's where the 16-inch actually entered the picture. Given the fact that it may be many, many years out, it certainly is a point for future discussion. And one concern we have, certainly, not only with our existing system, but also a 3.5-mile extension would be, we now have a 3.5-mile dead end. Not necessarily for stagnant water, but this is also a very high-pressure district. We would certainly have a lot of water hammer down there. And we do have water hammer in certain parts of our township. I know just recently the fire department experienced some water hammer, which actually has busted some of their internal plumbing. So it's definitely something that we're going to have to address down the road, especially with future development.
How far down does it go down Pleasant Valley?
How far down? I'm sorry.
Pleasant Valley system, or is it?
Currently, the system does not.
The future plan.
Well, this is the Hartland Glen Golf Course.
Okay.
This is
Lone Tree?
Yeah.
That's Lone.
Sorry about Lone Tree. Yes, I apologize. That's Lone Tree.
That's Lone Tree. Okay.
Yes. And certainly, again, I've highlighted some extreme elevations. The current end of the line at Arena Drive is approximately 970 feet. It continues to drop along M59 by about 10 feet, but then rises back up to 990 feet.
Why would we connect the manufactured home area?
Why would we not?
Why would we not?
I mean, it's have to be them asking for it, but certainly we could consider that if they wanted to. If it's available or they're willing to pay the expense. I'm not aware of any issues they've had with that community well. I know there were some issues with the community sewer, but that's been years ago.
And certainly, just as a caveat to that, if we were to look into something of that, I would probably make a recommendation to have that as a private system with like a master meter. What happens is when small community wells are put in, they generally don't build to the standards that the township does. This, again, is a very high-pressure district. If they have 2 to 4 inch water mains that are thinner material than what our standards are, we could really open ourselves up as far as compromising the integrity of that system. So
yeah, the coded parcels, for the future land use purposes, was focused on vacant lands, so I wouldn't discount them. I mean, for that matter, we didn't include the park.
Because there's some future, isn't there some future development of that park too?
It's given a designation for future land use. I don't recall what that is.
And this is just an example of what we're running into with our current system. At the end of the line near Arena Drive again, approximately 975 feet of elevation, we currently experience about 88 psi of water pressure, which, taking all other variable factors out of the equation, just simply looking at elevation, that would give us approximately 80 psi at the Tipsco Lake just by the elevation. However, when you look into the low point in this particular section, which is 955 feet of elevation, it would raise the water pressure to approximately 96.67 psi, and that's certainly a dangerous level. There's been talk about perhaps looking at individual homeowners or developers to put pressure-reducing valves on their building, which certainly would help their faucets and fixtures. However, our water system is, for all intents and purposes, relatively new. As it ages, the 90 to 100 psi water pressure is not good for your pipes underground. So a simple solution to this particular instance would be somewhere along M59, probably closer to the end of the existing line, installing a pressure-reducing valve that would simply discharge between 60 and maybe 64 psi, and that would basically regulate the low elevation point. It would probably bring that down into the high 70s range, probably 77, 78 psi, which is still high, but That's just the nature of all these elevation changes in this area.
So Bob, does a system like is proposed in the master plan of having dual 16-inch mains on each side, does that cure all that pressure problem, or is it?
It won't cure the pressure problem. You're still going to have the pressure based on elevation. The pressure reducing valve would certainly cure that, and basically it's a device that no matter what the incoming pressure is, it only allows whatever a predetermined pressure exit it. So you could feed 100 psi into one side of it. It's only going to allow 60 on the outside of it. However, there's a little bit more to it than that. What the dual water mains would do, or parallel water mains, would eliminate the water hammer by creating a loop. It would essentially, if for all intents and purposes, a wave were to go down one side, it would simply diffuse itself as it turned at the end of the line and went back the other way. And that's why the looped system is very important, that design in general to water main. You generally try and avoid dead ends whenever possible. So that's a lot of times where your debris ends up, or in the event of low water use, you'll end up having somewhat stagnant water, which is kind of the situation we're running into here. If we were to build a 16-inch main out and serve one facility, we're probably going to end up with some stagnant water, just because the demand is not there. Even in peak demand running irrigation, a 16-inch water main you'd have to use quite a bit of water to really keep that flowing and keep the fresh water in there.
Do you think that's why a 12-inch line was put in initially?
The master plan actually called for 12-inch to end where it does now, and if we were to extend from here to carry 16-inch to the border road or Tipsicle Lake. But it also calls for 16-inch mains going north, south, and creating one whole loop in here, which I have that slide coming up. I'll certainly show what the master plan calls for. But you'll kind of see the central hub was kind of 12-inch water main, and as we go to the outskirts of the township or the water system, proposed water system, the transmission lines were actually much larger. And I believe even when we look at Clyde Road, there was a 24-inch main proposed going north. So this is looking south down Old US 23, and the north-south leg of this is approximately 2 miles. If you add in the east-west leg, it totals approximately 3 miles. So I apologize, it may be somewhat misleading to say it's 3 miles to the Brighton Township border, but this is actually from the end of the existing water main. Again, the preliminary costs on this would range between $1 million and $1.6 million. This would depend on, whether we choose to go with 12-inch or 16-inch main. The master plan in this particular section actually calls for 16 and 20-inch mains. At that point, we're looking at transmission lines. You certainly don't want a residential home tapping into a 16 or a 20. So any future developments would basically tee into a large diameter transition and do an 8-inch or 12-inch, something of that nature, to feed their particular development. And again, what we're doing here is essentially creating a dead end. If we were to the parcels highlighted in green, if they were to develop, I would certainly look to see if they could create some sort of looping of the water main within their development, which would ease the impact of this dead end.
Bob, I got it.
Sure, absolutely.
12 to a 16 or 20, doesn't that reduce the pressure?
It doesn't necessarily reduce the pressure, because generally the flow coming off that wouldn't be enough. Picture a pinhole in a garden hose, if you will. You wouldn't really see the pressure drop until maybe all of these highlighted green parcels were developed. At that point, you may see a minor drop, but it wouldn't be anything monumental. I would say probably between 5 and 7 psi in this particular instance. There's just not enough demand down here. The reason why the master plan calls out for the 16 and 20-inch was actually to feed, essentially it comes down to the Brighton Township border, heads east and heads west. That's when you're really trying to encompass the much larger picture that you'd want to feed those. But for these properties that are highlighted in green, 12 to 16-inch main, it really would have a minimal impact. I would love to tell you that, quite frankly, I think a 12-inch water main would feed these parcels, but we have to look further down the road and say, okay, but if we were ever to tie into that 12 in and extend east or west, that's when we'd run into issues, and we'd want that larger diameter water main.
I guess I'm confused. If your main right now, what's existing in the ground right now, that's 12 inches?
Yes.
All right. So if you go to a bigger pipe past that, I mean, are you going to be able to produce enough water? I mean, it's kind of opposite of what a plumber would do. I mean, a plumber starts off with a bigger one and then works the smaller ones. This is like the opposite.
No, you're absolutely right. And you have to picture the whole thing under constant pressure.
Once it's charged.
Yeah, once it's actually charged, unless you were to open, say, 4 fire hydrants at the end of the line, yes, you're certainly absolutely right. But under normal domestic water use, you wouldn't see it because you're essentially a series of 1-inch service lines or 1.5 inches. And again, that's the pinhole and the garden hose. Once it's charged, you could basically poke holes in it all day, relatively speaking, and you're never going to drop your overall pressure. It's going to always be pressurized until you get to where you would cut the hose in half, or in this case, open 4 fire hydrants at the end of the line. Yes, you would certainly see it at that point.
Yep. And the way I would answer that, what he's saying is true, but when you go from smaller diameter to larger diameter, you're restricted by the maximum amount of flow that you can get through the smaller size pipe. The pressure on both sides might be the same, but the amount of flow that moves through it is diminished, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So the water that's in the larger pipe, once it exits the 12 and gets into the 16s that we're talking about, or 24, the velocity slows down, but the capacity is still there. It's kind of, if you think of it in terms of rivers, Mississippi carries a lot of water. It doesn't look like it's going that fast, and a smaller one's going to be moving a lot more rapid. And so when you do open up 4 or 5 fire hydrants, that's because you don't have the capacity. That's when you start seeing the drop-off.
Bob, where does the water main end going in this direction?
I apologize. The way I put the map on here to size it appropriately, it wasn't fitting, but it's...
Bowling alley?
Yeah, essentially just right at the bowling alley is the last service connection, if you will. And just, again, for a little bit of painting the picture here, we have an elevation at the end of the line of 995 feet. Generally, we're hitting between 67 psi and at times up to 72 psi. But you can see at the lower elevation of 955 feet, we're again approaching somewhat what I would consider very high water pressure for domestic use. Again, we may want to look somewhere in the neighborhood of along Old 23 if we were to extend this water main to, again, put a pressure reducing valve on here. This particular parcel, when we're looking at the north, Old US 23 future use, it's a little bit more complicated. There's a great range of elevations within each individual parcel. Approximately 4.0 miles to Clyde Road, future land use properties. Now, when I took that measurement, it's actually, you can see the Clyde Road interchange here at the north. These properties, although they didn't quite fit on the map, it's taken it to and through their property, if you will, to the next boundary. And again, the master plan proposes transmission lines anywhere from 20-inch to 24. Cost for something in this range would probably be $2.1 million to $3 million. Obviously, the larger diameter water mains you go, the bigger jump in price. There's not as much of a jump from 12 to 16, but certainly when you get into the 20s and the 24s, it's much more expensive. We also have again, the threat of a dead end in this particular situation. If these parcels were to develop, I would really encourage the developer to propose some sort of looping within their parcel. And you can see this is probably the extreme of the differentiation of the elevation. If we have, at the end of the pipe here, I don't have the elevation mark on here, but it's approximately 995 feet. If we have approximately 67 PSI, which is probably average for that particular section, that's going to equate to this particular spot here, which is the lowest point in all this of well over 100 PSI. And this is based on average pressures. Certainly if we have a spike and the end of the pipe is about 75 PSI, this will certainly be in the neighborhood of, 110 or so. That is just not safe for the water main nor for domestic use. I would recommend in this particular instance finding an elevation of approximately 970 feet, wherever that may lay on Old 23, and set a PRV at approximately 54 PSI. There's very extreme elevations changes within this particular area. And just as an FYI, you hear me mention these pressure reducing valves, and basically it's a valve that just goes right onto the water main. It's installed in a manhole structure. A good general construction cost is roughly $2,000 to $2,500 per inch in diameter that you go. So if you're looking to get a 12-inch PRV installed, you're probably looking just for the valve itself. I would think it's safe to say about $24,000 is a starting point. So that's just more of an FYI when we're doing budgetary factors into this. Now here's the 2010 master plan that I was speaking of. You can see the 16-inch main is this, shows up on light purple on my map. I just want to make sure that's what you're looking at. And you can see the green here by Arena Drive was and is the existing 12-inch, but it is proposed to run 16 all the way out to Pleasant Valley, but yet go up to Dunham Road, and then as we head west on Dunham Road, even increasing it to a 24-inch main. Again, this was to create a looped system. I don't know, this plan, I should also point out, does call for an additional treatment facility right in this area, this yellow node, if you will. They did call and recommend that there is some sort of source water and perhaps a pressure boosting station at that point to pressurize these mains. But you can see the proposed 2010 water master plan actually shows a 24-inch going up Hartland Road, and then these two orange lines here would be parallel 20-inch mains which head up to Clyde Road at that point. This was what was proposed, and that's why when it comes into question as far as when the developers come in, do we adhere to this particular plan, or is it something we may certainly discuss as allowing perhaps a 12-inch or something of that nature to meet the need for their development at that time.
Does that show the that site that's west of Autumn Woods that we talked about the last time?
Yep.
Dealing with the through and then also to and through, and
it does. In this particular case, the master plan calls for a 16-inch main. There's a 16-inch main that basically dead ends at what would be the southeast corner of Hartland Estates and shoots up Cullen Road. This master plan would basically call for that extension all the way out to Hacker Road. So there would be much more involved with that than just that particular Chestnut development, which we were speaking of before. This would be an extension of the main on the north side of M59.
now, in light of some of the proposals that we've entertained with this developer, obviously this has all changed right here. So,
and again, this is what was proposed back in 2010. If I could go back a couple slides after doing some reevaluation, I can bear with me one moment here. When we had the elevation here originally, you can see there's a red spot right here, which this is going to be a challenge to get water. It's higher than the water tower, and the pressure is certainly going to drop. Now, this little green parcel right here was that Chestnut development. What we had been tossing around the idea was perhaps allowing that developer to upgrade the water main to a 12-inch instead of 8-inch to run down that road, and then once they get to the southern portion of this particular parcel, heading west, and allowing that to qualify as their to and through, it's basically going around that high elevation point, and it eliminates any basically infrastructure improvements, if you will, but yet still would feed that need if it was ever needed down the road.
What size main runs down to the River Church?
Now, the River Church is a unusual circumstance. All commercial codes are to run 12-inch water main onto their property. The fire department was requiring for fire hydrants and whatnot to actually have the water main go all the way around the building. So what was allowed with the River Church was to basically run a 12-inch along the front of their property, and they were able to loop it around the building with an 8-inch and still meet the fire flow requirements and meet our design standards of minimum 12-inch feeding a commercial.
The 12, in that case, the 12-inch is on the north side of 59, I'm sorry, 16 to Hartland Estates, and they're connecting to a 12-inch at the back end of Hartland Estates.
That is correct, yes. They extended the 12-inch River Church connected on the Hartland Estates, I believe it's Maria Court, if I'm not mistaken, connected to the 12-inch. That was actually brought as part of Hartland Estates. They brought it to and through and actually put a stub right at the property line, and that is where River Church connected. So essentially what we have here, and just kind of run over this briefly, you can see the water master plan basically designs the system as multiple loops. This would eliminate the water hammer, you eliminate the dead-end water, creating stagnant conditions. Certainly larger diameter transmission water mains, which would be basically 16-inch and larger. They still call for the parallel M59 water mains in this particular application. But one thing you'll notice in the master plan is there's no additional 12-inch water main proposed. So that's certainly a point that maybe we should discuss for these future land use developments. They also have proposed in this particular model, you can kind of see it right there, there was a treatment plant right there, a treatment site. Because what they were proposing was eventually we're going to come up to the need for additional filtering capacity rather than house everything in one particular facility. There was a proposed idea to perhaps bring one down towards our sewer properties. So basically, I guess the takeaway, what I'd like everybody to look into is the future planning with regards to the 2010 master plan, and at what stage are we going to adhere to that? If we are, certainly we want to encourage development. The idea of looping water mains whenever possible, I just can't stress that enough. One of the goals we have internally is to reduce apparent water loss. There's two types of water loss. One is called real water loss, and that's when you know where the water went, but you really can't charge for it, such as like fire hydrant flushing. It's not water you can really charge for because you're flushing the dirt out of it. Apparent loss is even when we add up everything that we know where it went, we still have a certain percentage that we don't know where it went. Usually that can be related to meter inaccuracies. Meters, when they get old, they slow down. Unfortunately, they don't speed up. Or also leaks, unauthorized water use. situations like those. Just something we certainly want to keep within our radar and always monitor. I would recommend a meter replacement program, perhaps at the 10 or 15-year mark, because water meters do slow down. It has been proven that the cost of an additional meter, the municipalities can certainly recoup that money by upgrading to more accurate meter. Obviously, the pressure-reducing valves, when we're looking at all these, ideally you put your water tower in the highest spot within the township, and it flows downhill. Unfortunately, we have big hills, if you will, and the water pressure ends up rising too much, and that's where these pressure-reducing valves would come in. A pressure-reducing valve is a very cost-effective control measure, especially when you compare it to a booster station. Booster stations are much more expensive, so certainly wherever we could benefit from the pressure-reducing valves, that would be advantageous to us. And then just for future use, perhaps the Mill Point connection feasibility. That was addressed in the 2010 master plan to look into that, and just food for thought, more or less, and maybe perhaps we look into that in the future.
No, the only problem with that is they have their own well, and I think that it isn't run by the association. It's a private well run by, I think the original developer sold it to a private investor. So that's what you run into there.
Certainly.
And I still don't know how that is regulated. I don't believe there's any regulations at the state level other than safe drinking.
I know they...
I mean, in terms of like rates and charges.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is an entry-level license, if you will, that
right.
DEQ requires, but yeah, absolutely, there's no regulation as far as that.
So you run into the issue that if I were someone that lived there, I'd probably object if there was ever any attempt to have the township connect, because my guess is they're probably paying less right now than...
Ironically, I received quite a few calls where people are...
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they are complaining about their water rates. I find out they live in Mill Point, and I say, unfortunately, that's a private system, and I've been asked multiple times, well, is there a petition we can pass around to connect? So, and it may be a few people, but just more of an FYI.
Because it's a site condo, and they actually, their master deed's going to cover that.
And then what I also have done is I've taken a look at our water CIP. Many of the items are either no longer needed that were originally part of the approved 5-year water CIP, and many of the things that are on there have been completed. So we certainly have somewhat of a cost savings, if you will, that by projects we're no longer doing. And I'm just going to kind of spitball this. I know one of the projects listed in the approved 5-year CIP was to relocate the Hartland Estates booster pump station. Further research has revealed when the River Church came on, we had a water study, and plans were mismarked in the way that booster station is actually set up. It has a purpose, and it cannot be moved. It's to meet the fire flows for Rotundo Drive. So that's something that I believe there was approximately $350,000 kind of reserved for that particular project, but it won't happen, basically, because that station cannot be moved. It's not to say that we might not need a booster station down the road, but it would be developer-driven, basically.
So what does that mean for the River Church?
The River Church still meets the requirements that they need to. Primarily what it would be is the corner north of 59, east of Cullen. If that were to ever develop, because that's kind of in that red zone there, we're probably going to have to look into some sort of boosting up the water pressure in that particular instance. The key 3 components right now that our system will need down the road is, I will certainly be recommending the installation of a water tower mixer. Last year we had the tower actually freeze at the top, had about 3 foot of ice in it, and it caused quite a bit of damage to the tower. And what's happened is we've basically replaced all our wells, and now they're pumping at the capacity they should be. It fills the tower up faster than it has historically, and the water sits there. And mind you, we had a very cold winter, and I've spoken with many different municipalities, and there were a lot of towers that experienced the same issue last year. What a mixer does is essentially it's a blade, if you will, at the bottom that simply stirs the water up. And another advantage of it is it keeps your chlorine residual much higher by circulating the water. Your chlorine doesn't try and go to the top or to the bottom. It just keeps it at a constant level. So it's certainly advantageous, and I think the repairs, to alleviate any future repairs due to freezing, I will be recommending a tower mixer in the future. That cost us approximately $25,000. And what we'll need to do sometime down the road, I'm not necessarily and that it's an immediate need, but it's certainly going to be developer-driven. We're nearing the 80% capacity for our filtering, and that's when DEQ kind of says, hey, you need to start planning. When you hit 80% of your firm capacity, whether it be source water or filter, they don't want to wait till you're at 97% and then decide that you need to do something. The picture here is actually the 2 filter vessels on the back side of the water treatment plant. What we would be looking to do is add a third one. This particular treatment plant was actually designed for 4. In fact, it has the knockout panels in the wall to add those. Unfortunately, the filter vessel was misquoted, I'll say, in the approved 5-year CIP. The actual cost for filters in the $750,000 range, and this is going through the same manufacturer as what's currently out there, which would be my recommendation. That's direct from the manufacturer. At that time, when we do replace the filter vessel, what we'll end up with is the 2 existing filters will have, for all intents and purposes, old media that basically has been used over, say, the last 10 years. What that will do is water will take the path of the least resistance. It's going to go through that new filter vessel because it has clean sand in it. We really want to replace the filter media in the other 2 units to balance that. It would basically overtax the new unit. So those are my recommendations as far as the, perhaps I could call them modifications to the CIP. These are certainly going to be needs in the future.
And basically, as we've talked about before, that is going to be development driven. And essentially, if we sell 100, 150 plus more REUs, that's what that money's intended for, is to pay for, new REUs that are being sold that increase the demand on the system. Those REUs would go to pay for that.
So the question, so you get a developer in that wants to develop some land, and you're telling him they have to put in a 16-inch water main down to their property, and there's a cost associated with that, certainly, and they're, going to be, well, how I can be serviced by a 12, maybe that's their argument, that they would rather not put in a 16. And do you say that, well, based on us selling the additional REUs, we're going to pay for the upgrade to the 16? I mean, what do you mean by the selling of the REU is going to pay for that? Are you going to...
I'm mainly, obviously, the big ticket item there is a 3rd treatment vessel, and that if we're running up against that firm capacity, if we see more flow, we'll have to put that in, and that more flow will come from additional REUs being sold. And this isn't like the sewer system where the REUs being sold are being counted on to pay for.
Right, I understand.
Right. It's.
I'm just trying to understand what your additional REUs was going. You're saying the additional REUs would be going for improvements to the existing system.
Yeah.
These types of things, not the costs of putting in that new infrastructure.
Sure.
Okay.
And one of the things to talk about is that question of the master plan, which, I mean, what you saw was like the full ultimate build-out. I call it the ultimate build-out of the water system in that master plan. It's hard to imagine, at what time frame, how many decades down the road, we actually look like that. But Bob, maybe you can revisit the conversation you and I had, because part of your discussion is considering maybe not having them put in a 16-inch. Maybe it is okay to have them do 12-inch extensions, because really, am I right, the benefit of having them do 16-inch comes into play if we actually see this happen, where you have the loops going all around and...
That is correct. Yeah. You would essentially run into exactly what Glenn was pointing out, that you're going to tack on a 16-inch main on the end of the 12. It's really not going to have a great benefit without being looped to other source water, if you will.
So just kind of being open to the conversation of, how realistic we think, this type of looping might be, and I know we're always trying to be careful of balance, because we don't want folks sitting in these chairs, 50 years from now, begrudging our decision to allow 12 inches to go in instead of 16. But, there's a reasonable conversation there to be had about whether or not, allowing developers to just continue 12 inches is acceptable.
Well, my concern would be who's going to pay for that stretch down Lone Tree Road that really goes to nothing. I mean, that's
right.
That's a big chunk of...
Well, and that's where we're kind of all crystal balling how realistic is that picture you see there, because it is ultimate build-out. I don't even know that the Water Master Plan said this is the 20-year. I want to say it was the 30-plus year.
Yeah. It identified a 2010, a 2020, 2030 model, and then the ultimate district.
Yeah, this isn't even the 2030 model. This is the...
It's going to be hard to get looping to the north anyway, right?
Certainly.
So that's, unless we loop to Fenton or something.
Well, so then I guess my thought is, it isn't that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, it wouldn't be a case where your community would just continue to get denser and denser and denser and denser and denser by, forever. I mean, at some point, your community is built out, and is built out the way it exists. It isn't that, every 5-acre piece of property is being divided down into quarter acres. I mean, so it almost seems like there should be some thought put behind the master plan to say, yeah, that's all great, that provides all sorts of loops, but in reality, it's never going to happen. And should we be concentrating on what will happen rather than some, engineer, drawing lines on a piece of paper saying, well, this is what here's your nice, beautiful, fully looped system that you're never going to have money to do. So then you're making decisions on a plan that doesn't have any hopes of implementation in the...
Yeah, I think when we do the next update, there'll probably be more opportunity. I know that, engineers aren't trying to be planners, even though they sometimes do, and planners try to be engineers, but, we talked about a build-out analysis based on the future land use plan since before I was here. I know there was talk about doing a build-out analysis, and that's really what you're talking about, is what does reasonable build-out look at by looking at, what are the properties that are already developed that aren't going to get any denser because they already got structures on them and will probably stay that way, versus what is the potentiality of development. I think as we continue to do iterations of the master plan, future land use map, and they'll get better. So, forgive us for maybe taking a little bit longer on this than we needed. I think it was a good, sort of refresher for all of us, the board, to spend some time kind of reacquainting itself with the water system. Again, none of this is to say, let's go out and build these pipes. This is a big step in the gap for when we do have developers coming and asking, instead of us scratching our head and saying, oh, gee, I guess you have to talk to an engineer and figure that one out. We actually have some answers to that. And because of that study that went into it, we do have those three, more closer issues in front of us for the CIP. And if we are seeing developments and we're selling REUs that will pay for that, That would be the next thing to start talking about.
I've got one question. You stated that there's 616 connections. You have 3,127 RU sold, and you're using currently 1,678. So there's a big, maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but it seems like there's a big gap between what the current system has sold and what's currently being used. So my question is, without going down a rabbit trail,
I'll make it brief.
the system wasn't built big enough as it is right now for what we've sold in it. Is that fair to say? Or
It's a risk, yes.
It is a risk.
right now, what was currently built by what's been sold can't handle what's already been sold in RUs without putting a lot more money into it.
27 RUs that are sold. We can actually filter with our current capacity 3,307. So we're nearing the limit.
But you're proposing to add a third filter, so that...
Absolutely.
It would bump it up, yeah, right.
But my question is, again, when we get into these types of elements, we were sold a water tower for X that would be able to do X, but really, in actuality, it can't do X. You're going to have to put a lot more money into it, or was that part of the original proposal?
Not the water tower. I mean, it's really your thing that's restricting you most is the vessel.
Yeah. No, but my point is that when the system was originally built, it was built to handle a certain amount of people. So that system.
Basically, the 3,300 RUs. So what's coming into play here as well is DEQ, and they're 80% of that is what's really the triggering event in their mind. So 80% of the 3,300 is where they start putting pressure on that.
So when it was built, was that 80% program part of that, or is this another funded mandate?
No, that would have been that had been in place in 2002.
I don't know. It seems to me like here we are looking to expand something that is barely without. If we started hooking up more homes in not too distant future, we're going to put a lot more infrastructure in what we currently have.
So what's not talked about here, but is explored more in the report, it isn't so much, I mean, these are average flows, it's the peak day, peak hour. Everybody's got the sprinkler system on. That's where. So I guess in fairness to you, I mean, you bring up a reasonable point. In fairness, yes, the system was designed to sustain, but not so much if you end up in a crazy amount of usage all at once. And of course, we know many communities throughout Southeast Michigan, that's a real issue.
That's why they do the opposite. You can't.
Yeah. Right.
Opposite watering.
And that's a real part of the conversation. I think we've touched on it briefly before is, if we wanted to get into regulating watering and all those sorts of things, maybe we could stave off the vessel a little bit longer. I just haven't heard anything that would suggest we want to get into that, and I would say that there's a good reason not to want to get into that. And if the REUs coming in, being sold, if additional REUs are sold that are basically going to pay for that, that makes it an easier decision.
What's the current price of RU? Water RU?
Just over 4,400.
4,400.
45%.
Okay. Anything else on that this evening? And being that, we'll move on to item number 11B, which is village sidewalk improvements. Bob,
You want to put it up there?
I think you still have the floor, I believe.
I'll make this one quick. As part of the approved fiscal year 2014-15 budget, the Township Board allocated approximately $40,000 for sidewalk improvements in the village area. What I've basically done is preliminary construction estimates were indicating that these costs for the said improvements would certainly come in more than $40,000. For the sake of argument and discussion purposes, what I did is I took the complete proposed improvements and divided it into 6 subsections.
I'm just going to highlight them here. We have a green section on Crouch Road. You can barely see these, but there's 6 flags of concrete in this walkway. We have the Maple Road section heading east, purple section here, which is the northeast part of Hartland. The orange section would be northwest, and so on. Essentially what we did is we created an RFP, and we sent this out to 9 local and somewhat various concrete contractors who are certainly capable of doing this kind of work. The RFP actually required them to submit a bid for each section. So that way the township board, I didn't want to speak on behalf of the township board and say, hey, we don't have enough money to do X, Y, and Z. We're only going to do this or only do that. That's for the board discussion this evening. So what we did is we made each contractor submit a bid for each section of this particular project, subsections, if you will. And what they had to do was basically come up with a base bid, which would be for the concrete, and then I requested options for the tree removal. Certainly there's trees that may or may not be required to be removed. I wanted that as options just to keep apples to apples, and I think it was fair if one contractor was including tree removal and another thought he could do it without. That being said, I had a mandatory pre-bid meeting in the village. We actually walked these with the contractors. We had 4 contractors that actually showed up to the pre-bid meeting, and that resulted in receiving 3 different bids, if you will. So I'm just going to pull this down and actually create a bid tab to kind of break this down a little bit more. The one that was, for all intents and purposes, published and in your packet, I've actually revised that. As of 5 o'clock today, I found out some more information. So I'd like to pass out a new one if you guys don't mind.
So the goal tonight is to prepare for decision on the 19th about which projects we want to move forward with.
See here, basically, we had 3 contractors: Manual Cement Company, Priest Companies, and San Marino Excavating. And at the top of this, you can kind of see the 6 different sections, and that each person, for each contractor, had to actually submit a quote for each particular section. And Manual Cement Company came in the lowest at $49,804 for all the work. Originally, when the first bid tab was published, there was a caveat included with their bid package that said that they would only honor their prices that they quoted if we were to give them all the work. They didn't want to piecemeal it. And in addition, I requested from every bidder that they have an option for the tree removal. And Manual does not have any tree removal options in their bid. So at that time, I thought that was somewhat disqualifying, or didn't qualify them to be included in this. I was making a recommendation to go to the Priest companies. However, to be fair, I reached out to Manual Cement Company and was finally able to get a hold of them today at 5 o'clock prior, and they had indicated that they would indeed honor these prices regardless of how much we wanted to add or subtract to it. It is also their belief that they can do this work without any tree removal. There are certainly some large tree roots. I know
they could do all of this work without any tree removal?
This is what Manual Cement Company has indicated, which is reflected. I have also, the recommendation at the bottom, originally, what I did is I built in that was essentially a contingency, because I'm not 100% convinced that there's trees that are going to have to stay. I don't think they can do it all, keeping the trees. I'm going to have to ignore my recommendation at the bottom on running into connection problems. But essentially, if we were to go with Mattioli on this particular project, we could complete first 5 in this order, the first 5 projects with a 15% contingency, and I believe it came out to approximately $37,000. I'll revert back to the map as well, just to kind of show you what portions would be done for that amount. So we had the green crossroads section, the Six Flags, the yellow Maple Road section, the orange and the purple Hartland Road section. Basically, all the work would be done with the exception of the red stretch, which Mattioli was approximately $18,000 and some change on that particular part of the project.
The red stretch is the west side of Hartland
Yes,
Road.
we are.
I say we do it all. I mean,
I do have a question.
Sure.
And it's been a while since when Larry and I walked that, maybe a year and a half ago. But where there's a lot of solid red on, on this.
Yes.
All that sidewalk wasn't that. We didn't think it was that bad, unless it's deteriorated even worse since we were there. It was bad in front of the.
Yeah, I mean, Bob and I went out there again after that. We took the map that me and you walked it with and kind of did what I think was a little bit better investigation. If you remember, a lot of that sidewalk was covered up with, some of it has grass growing over it.
Right. It was low, but my concern is that exact part. Is it in front of the veterinarians area where there's not even a sidewalk visible?
That's
North of there.
north of that.
North of there.
Just to the north of there? And that's where there's a bunch of trees and everything else that you'd have to remove them.
Correct.
But wouldn't that be a lot bigger job? You're going to have to bring in some fill, because you can't put the sidewalk.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that we would recommend waiting on that west side Hartland Road is we've gotten the road plan and pending millage approval, we got to deal with the drain going through the village, and we're going to redo Hartland Road, and in doing all of that, I would anticipate that we, do some smart engineering to deal with the issues that have caused sediment to bury those sidewalks, that, waters, stormwater management, because of the way those are, that we may be putting in sidewalk that we end up changing the grade on or replacing.
I don't disagree with that, except that I think we might make it worse by doing the one side, fixing the other side, and fixing all the other, and not fixing that, because if that's a low elevation, like what Bill's talking about, it's going to end up worse. You're going to fix one side that, don't you think?
Through that stretch, we're only replacing 6 squares of sidewalk on the other side of the road.
That side's actually in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
The big key tickets are the Krause Road, basically run from Hartland all the way to the school.
Right.
That's all brand new. There will be some brush cutting in there. And then the Maple Road section going from Hartland to the first intersection. What we're proposing in that particular aspect is that the current sidewalk is even the width is less than 4 feet. Of the village plan called for a 5 foot, so we would just plan to put the 5 foot in the whole way there. So that wouldn't have to be modified to make the village plan around.
Isn't there somebody that owns a big dump truck that lives down in that area? That parks.
There could be. I mean, it is torn up. I will say, when we were out there at the pre-bid meeting, a couple of the guys had a shovel, and we found spots of existing sidewalk that was only 1.5 inches thick.
Okay.
So I mean, to where we hit dirt, not just where there wasn't even stone under it. They were into the topsoil under 1.5 inches. So I don't want to necessarily pin it on the vehicles. I mean, I think there's been perhaps some issues with how much material was put down in the first place. That's kind of added to the deterioration.
A while ago, may I ask a question, please?
Sure.
A while ago, you asked us to fill out a form about possible sidewalk ordinance.
That is correct.
Although we're discussing this to make a decision in the future at another time, I'm just curious. I don't know if I'd be anxious to put a lot of money into doing this new construction work and repairs until we have that ordinance on the books, so to speak, or very close to being approved. What is the likelihood, either you or James, of that happening soon?
We are pretty close to the final draft. In fact, we have it narrowed down, and we anticipate sending it out for legal review probably within the next 2 weeks.
So we'd be asking you to approve this, approve the work before you see or approving the ordinance, but they'd be happening pretty close, if that's okay.
Was the contractors planning on doing this work in this construction season or next year?
This construction season.
So they probably start before the November 5th election, November 4th election.
Yes.
How long did they give you a time estimate? How long this might take?
Once they get started, they're anticipating about 2 weeks or less.
I mean, if we were going to do it, it'd be nice to have it done before school started.
That's my thinking.
Oh. That would be nice.
But not likely.
Well, especially along the piece in front of the post office. It's all new, and
It's going to result in
That
any
piece will also tie into the post
roads getting closed? Is this going to result in any roads getting closed or anything like that?
They generally do not believe so. I've been working with the road commission, and they're just going to do a blanket permit for us on that, so they don't have to pull individual permits for each parcel. They just want to know what scope of work should have that answer for them.
Is any of this sidewalk that's on here eligible for that safer pathways to school grant?
Some of it could be, not all of it, but some portions down, the portion down Hartland Road and even down Kraus Road could potentially be.
So if we pay for it first, are we going to be able to get reimbursed, or do they say you got to get the grant first?
We've got enough other projects. I mean, you only can qualify for so much. I can't imagine us getting more than $100,000, if that. And probably the best projects for that is going to be Hartland Road south of Dunham, as called out in the roads plan. And the bump out, even the traffic calming at Kraus and Avon, I mean, stuff like that. I mean, the road plan said we were going to invest another $200,000+ into other elements of the village plan and the sidewalks, the streetscape stuff, and some of that's going to be eligible. We'll eat that up. There's no shortage of projects that will be eligible for that.
So, Bob, you have a contingency of $4,700, which...
How much?
$4,700. None of these prices include tree removal. And in what you've, the part you've outlined here, it's hard to imagine that they can go along the south side of Kraus Road and not have any tree removal there at all. But I just wanted to, I mean, because in the green section, which is Kraus Road, right, Priest has $19,500 in tree removal. And, I mean, I know we talked about, some options of what you might be able to...
$2,500.
I think it's $2,500.
$2,500.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, so that would come to
Yeah, 19 is the total of this whole thing, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, then my point, I guess, never mind.
well, but what we don't want to have happen is you put the sidewalk and right next to it's a bunch of brush that just got cut back. That's now you're going to have to deal with it.
Right.
And
Move out of your way to get through.
And the reason I really encourage the contingency is I really like to avoid having to come back to ask for money if it's deemed necessary. It's just going to delay the project.
does the board feel there's any reason that we couldn't act on this evening?
I mean, I just, I'm looking at these, and I can understand that the bids would not be, all the same, but usually when we're dealing with professionals and like this, that they'd be relatively close. I mean, we're talking about...
Not necessarily late in the construction season when people already have jobs lined up. If we were doing this in the spring, I might expect that, but if somebody's already got...
That's a good point, but 4 times...
Well, I think
the larger one is 4 times the lowest?
I think we saw the same thing when we bid with the M59 Park.
Yeah, we had quite a fair...
I'll tell you something. I took 2 bids on some concrete work to be done at my house, and the one bid was...
Well, they're going to, if they need the work, they're going to bid low. So if they don't really need it, they're going to bid high, and if they get it, fine. I understand all that.
I'm just saying, it was 3 times as much, but the higher one versus the lower one, and at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know without looking at the individual, what they were looking at. It's got to be part of the linear, the unit pricing per linear feet. Where were they on the concrete cost?
We didn't get unit pricing.
You didn't get any unit pricing, okay. And I will tell you this, the concrete this season has just been crazy.
Well, it's gone up a lot because of the demand.
The demand is huge. It's tough getting...
But I do know that, I know all 3 of these.
I know.
And I can tell you one for sure, that's all he does is sidewalks for cities and municipalities. So I don't know. A little bit concerned that we're going to get the right work done. I mean, you came up with, what, $40,000 or so?
I just did it. I knew we had $40,000 allocated from the budget, so I put enough products to hit that. I anticipated being just shy of 6 figures.
Yeah. But even if you add the tree removal and that they've identified, which be at 50,000.
I honestly thought the tree removal would come in a lot higher. I figured that was going to take up quite a large chunk of the project.
Well, and really, some of the big trees are in that red section. That's in front of the music hall where that huge tree is.
Yeah.
And so, by holding off on that one, I mean, that...
Well, that's where you look at the bid prices, that's where a big chunk of it is. Those are...
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that's not on here, I wish, is that tree in front of the museum. Not the museum, the music hall. That concrete is...
it's buckled.
It's in the red.
It's in the red one.
Yeah,
but
right.
But that spot is it's a gathering place. It'd be nice to just take care of that. And you probably can't do it unless you take that tree down. Or if you could go around it or do something, but that looks awful. That's the worst part of the whole thing. If we do all the other stuff and don't fix that, it's going to kind of go like...
All I know is people are going to say, well, they did that, so how come they didn't finish and then you're going to have all the questions.
Additions and subtractions. If you want the tree taken out, it's certainly got it out.
Yeah,
we can figure that out between now and the next meeting, if that's the direction the board wants to go.
Yeah, I know that some of the sidewalks are pretty narrow.
Yes,
it's in the right of way. 3 feet. I don't even think they're 4 feet.
The one...
I think in front of the museum, I think it's about 3 feet. Those are 3 feet. Those are not 4 feet sidewalks.
At the museum,
so is this going to look like a patch job?
Yes.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that's why some of the red you see there is, going back to Bill's point, is a complete line.
Yeah.
Because
you could go in there,
you could replace this flag that's broken and skip one and do the next one.
It's going to look like a patch job.
Well, and is it really cost effective for somebody to come out there and lay forms and do 3 feet and then stop and run another section of 3 feet, then stop and do 6 feet? So that's why that red ended up being a
Go ahead.
lot.
The first bit, the Bandiola, where he says he's not taking out any trees, is he just going to like cut the roots? Is that the idea? He's just going to come along and just cut the roots and don't worry about the tree. So the tree could be right up against the new sidewalk.
And I can assure you, there are sections where it will be right up against the new sidewalk.
Which is crazy.
Which he would probably go around.
I don't agree with that. Pardon me?
He would probably go around. I mean, I've seen that done before, too.
To go around the tree.
Well, they do a
Our recommendation would be to take the trees out of the right of way.
Tree, yeah.
And if nobody has any heartburn over
But
that.
the ones where he's probably going to be cutting the roots aren't in the right-of-way. They're on private property. They might be...
The one on the east side you're talking about, or on Crossroad too?
No, not on the crossroad. On the east side,
Yeah. That one's,
north of the business there,
Yep, I know what
Village
you're talking.
Market, those ones are between the sidewalk and the people's house.
Gotcha.
And I won't pretend to know exactly where the right-of-way line is, but I'm certain that whole tree isn't in the right-of-way.
Right.
So it isn't a case where you'd be removing a tree out of the right-of-way there.
If we're interested, we could certainly talk to the property owner about that, because otherwise, I mean, certainly we could cut the root, and the future health and stability of that tree would be on them unless they're willing to have it removed.
And on the Crossroad, the new area, I can't remember, is there any ditching along that? Is the road pretty much the same level as the sidewalk there?
Actually, near Hartland Road, the ground actually developed, so if anything, we probably have to remove some, rebalance that a little bit.
Okay,
And I went to the tune of maybe 24, 30 inches. It's not anything that's going to require a retaining wall, but
Okay.
there's definitely some...
And then when you go from the post office to like Creekside, doesn't that dip down through there?
Yes.
So are you gonna build it up?
Yes, there would basically be a small swale, if you will, that's built in with the dirt.
Okay.
And they'll probably put a piece of PVC or...
That's what I was gonna ask. You put some tile underneath it so the water can get through it.
To avoid some guide wires and whatnot, what we'd probably do is kind of bump it out closer to the road, in front of the post office, and then dive back in closer to the homes, if you will. It avoids the guide wires and it'll allow the T intersection at the existing post office line. It's a much better design when you're out there on site and stuff.
Highland Township just recently did a lot of sidewalk work. Who's their contractor? Do you know?
I do. In fact, I know. And,
It's not one of the three, I
it
take
is not. He would not respond to us. He was actually something package RFP, and as well as 6 others. We had 9 total packages. Quite frankly, there were a few that just simply didn't want to.
So we've got a couple of weeks. Do we want to get some more information to see what we could do?
Do we have at least somewhat of a consensus on what we'd like to try to accomplish based on this information? I'd like to think we're close to knowing that.
I think we are. I think the issue is, my issue is, what can we do to complete that in front of the music hall?
Okay.
It looks bad. It's the
I would
dangerous
prefer to
part.
do it with the whole thing. I think that if we wait for us to fix the road and a bunch of other and drainage, that'll never get done.
Well, I won't say never, but I agree with you. I think we should do the whole thing.
I'm just being that drainage down there is probably close to $1 million.
No.
Well, I mean, if you want to do it right, you get that old drain that cuts right through there. It's a county inter-county drain there.
I want to do the whole thing too.
So my question about that is, though, the red section, north of the veterinary clinic, you're not going to just put sidewalk in there. You're going to have to bring that ground up, or you're going to be in the same boat that you're in right now, that all the water rolls over it, the earth erodes, and you got grass growing over the top of the sidewalk again. So
And that's the kind of situation where we would look towards the drain project to look at strategically putting, whether it's curb or catch basin or whatever, to engineer it better than, simply going through and raising grade and creating new problems.
How much of that could we actually do to add this to this project, so that we could get that part done?
To deal with the drainage there?
I mean, at least some of the drainage, so that we don't have the problem.
Then
Because ultimately it makes its way to the Ore Creek.
we've got to have a serious conversation then about that being engineered. I mean, the drain project would be engineered. This is not an engineered piece, and so I wouldn't, and that's part of the reason why I might have us consider not doing that part, so that when we do the engineering on the drain project and the road, that all that can be.
I'm curious.
There's no win-win.
What's our time frame for getting that aspect done? Because as I whispered over here to Matt, I said, by the time we do that, we might be past the useful life of what we would put in today. So.
I have no thought that we would delay that. If it's in the plan, I think we know the steps. There is a drainage district already established, so we deal with that piece of it. There's a piece where we would commit amount for the at-large portion. We've got to do some engineering because we're also going to want to be doing the resurfacing at the same time, and we'd throw the sidewalks and how to get good drainage the best we can on a reasonable dime done at the same time. I have no reason to think that's not done in the first couple of years with the rest of them. It'd be one of the bigger projects. It's not a simple road project, but why wait on it?
Okay.
But if the millage doesn't pass,
oh yeah,
it doesn't make sense to replace a sidewalk that's deteriorated and without improving it, so that it's not going to revert back to the condition it is now.
That's a good question.
That's why I was trying to figure out the timing of all this.
Yes.
And that's why you're suggesting to do all of the work except for the west side of Hartland Road now?
My recommendation is based off the $40,000 application.
Yeah.
Carry out any which of the
We can do it. I'm just acknowledging there's a risk we may end up putting in concrete that we will either wish we hadn't or will be paying to redo. So if the board's desire is to carry it all out, we can get it done.
I guess I recognize where Joe's coming from, where people use both sides of the street. Mm-hmm. But if we're going to try to authorize this work before we know how the village turns out, I guess I would rather only do that part that excludes the west side of the Hartland Road. Recognizing that if the millage does pass, we'll have engineering dollars and other things to address those issues in the future. And if the road millage doesn't pass, then we should spend some additional dollars beyond the construction cost to alleviate those problems.
Well, Matt, I understand what you're saying, and I agree to it to a point, but this whole thing, good reason why this project even started is for safety reasons for the kids that are walking to school, especially in the wintertime when there are no sidewalks at all on certain parts of the streets where they walk, and they have to walk in the street. Somebody's going to get hit over there. So part of the reason that we wanted to get this thing going is because of that safety issue. So regardless if the millage passes or not, I still think we have to address this.
And I don't disagree with you either, Joe. That was why I asked my earlier question on what the status is of our sidewalk ordinance. Because, we could build sidewalks and hope people use them, but unless we have some way to require the residents to clear those sidewalks during snowstorms, the kids are still going to be walking in the street.
Well, that's what the ordinance is going to do, and that's going to come almost simultaneously with the project.
Right.
So would it make any sense to talk with the contractor, if we got 2 weeks before you want us to make a decision on this, to discuss the most northern portion of the red that's in front of the music hall. That's where that big tree is.
Right.
That the sidewalk is like this. It isn't an issue of that we're going to be putting sidewalk in low-lying ground. It'll address, your issue that you think we should address that particular spot, and it's just a slight increase over what at least it's 115 feet. I don't know, certainly the cost of removing that tree is going to be pretty good. I look at, Priest's estimate for that section has $5,000 for tree removal in that whole red area, and having walked it, there's more than just that one tree. So, maybe it's something that, the board would be willing to look at if
So that's probably easy. We can figure that out, what it would take to go south of George a little bit further, and we know that's probably not going to get in the way of any future drain improvements. I'm still hearing two pretty mutually exclusive ideas, opinions on both sides of it, on whether to do the rest of that, and that doesn't have anything to do with that tree or that stretch. So I don't know if I haven't heard, I don't feel that I've heard a consensus towards one or the other.
That's why I offered that, to see if I could get to a consensus.
Okay, all right.
My opinion is the more we can do, I've been in support of the more we can get done. If it means those two sections that are on the south end of in the corner of Krause and the south end there, if you can get them to kind of hold off on that, or I don't know what you want to do, but make that part of the road project. It's just, you're going to get the questions. The questions are, why did they work on all that and leave that?
But that isn't the sections you're talking about off of Krause here to the south side. Isn't that the critical part of the?
No, you're saying on Hartland Road.
No, I'm talking about the red.
Hartland
You're
Road.
talking about the red.
Or Avon. These, so we could look at from maybe a little bit north of Maple up to George, because I do know that driveway that's across from Maple is a little bit low, so I don't know if we want to go too much. We can go take a look at it, but if we did the first 5 groups and then the section south of George past the music hall, and bring that back for the next meeting?
Yep. That sounds like a great idea.
I think it's brilliant. I'm glad I thought of it.
Yes.
No, not that far. It'd be, yeah, up there.
Well, this, just one last question. There had been talk about side parking, or what is it?
Angle parking, yeah.
Angle parking down the main part of the road there and improving that. Is that part of the road plan?
It's not part of this. The road plan basically gave an allowance of $200 and some odd $1,000 for additional improvements. We'll that's going to be ultimately at our discretion here to decide which pieces of the village plan make the most sense.
Okay.
So whether it's bump outs and traffic calming or angle parking. So that'll be a future.
That won't affect the sidewalk?
No.
Okay.
Anything else tonight on sidewalks?
Just for clarification, you want me to get a quote on the section 115 feet and come back for more discussion?
The park in front of the fire, or the music hall.
Right.
Yeah.
So just that section, then we'll come back and discuss it again?
We'll get the number and have the contract ready to go for all 5, or the first 5, and then that section in front of the music hall. And I think a good place to start.
Is there which contractor we want to go with?
I would go with the ones you've already recommended.
Yep.
I would agree.
And we'll make sure to put in a reasonable contingency, including tree removal.
And removing, what would it cost to remove that tree if
Yes.
we wanted to do it?
Right. We'll make sure to press that a little, and at least have the budget numbers available and make a better decision when we get in there.
Kill the tree, probably. Okay.
Oh, wait, that music hall one?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, you get that music hall one, it's got it.
Oh, it's dead anyway. So why don't we just have it removed?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Are we good?
That one.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next item, which is 11C, the sewer property.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just a couple of items to preface before this discussion. Again, the interested buyer is requesting to remain anonymous at this time. I'll go through the draft purchase agreement with you and just kind of hit the highlights of what we're talking about, because this is really the first time we've talked corporately about some of the concepts that are on the table that there seems to be some buy-in into. Maybe the simplest thing to deal with is to break it into two pieces. One is the asking price of the land, and then what do we do with the future unpaid assessments that are left there. So when it comes to the purchase price of the land, they are essentially agreeing to pay the list price that we have, and in consideration of the phased closing, that they're buying it in pieces, that for any of the pieces that they don't buy at the first closing, that there is an interest applied to the list price of 5.25% per year. So they're paying interest on that delayed closing for breaking it into three phases of closing. And for purposes of that discussion, we ran some quick numbers today, and I don't want to get too hung up or talking about maybe specific numbers, but I think what you'll see here is that with that approach, with taking into consideration all of the costs that we have into those properties to date, the closing costs are going to be, they're not included in here. There's going to be some closing costs there. Of course, there's attorney's costs and all of this. We're not capturing all the costs, but the bottom line is you see that there's some net proceeds. That's definitely, obviously, a goal we were shooting for, and that's a positive to consideration of this potential purchase agreement. We've kind of broken it into, after the assumptions, you have three different, closings, and there's a total there in the center as far as the estimate of what those total net proceeds could be. The other half of this is now what happens with the assessments on the back side, and this is where they were originally asking in their letter of intent for essentially a deferment until such time as they build a product and they sell it, and that new owner of that product could take over the assessments and they don't have to pay the cost of those assessments in the middle. Working with the attorney, the township attorney, we were able to clarify that there are some options there, and that we could, and it's in the language of the purchase agreement draft you've seen, provide for that the assessments would be deferred, and at such time that the successor takes ownership of the structure with the REU or multiple REUs, they then become payable immediately, like in full. The homeowner buys the house that they built. They're going to have to pay off the assessment, including the deferred payments and all the accrued interest today. So for all intents and purposes, what's being proposed here makes us whole on all assessments going forward, all interest accruals, and they are agreeing to take on all 498 REUs, even if they don't build enough product to use 498 REUs, which is very much a possibility here. And there's a provision on the back end of that says there's a 7-year window in which they've got to do that, where they can defer the assessments. And if they're not able to finish it out or whatever, those assessments, they've got to start making assessment payments at the end of those 7 years. And if they don't, it's an issue, again, of tax foreclosure and including unimproved structures. So I think there's a lot, by working with the attorney, I think we've really identified a good solution, if you're so inclined to take it, that would help them with their, the middle costs, the carrying costs of the project. As we've said, we become somewhat of a quasi partner in the development of it, but that could potentially see us covering our costs on what we've got into it. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. I've given a brief summary to some complex issues. The board questions, thoughts? The idea of this discussion was, because we haven't talked about these concepts as a group, wanted to do that, because otherwise we probably will have a purchase agreement that they will have signed for our next meeting, looking for the board to approve it. And so if we're barking up the wrong tree, or there's some issues here that the board remains concerned about, we should definitely talk about that.
So I have a question that seems like there's some, I'm seeing two different things. So what you said is that the interest would be charged on the pieces of property after the first one.
Correct.
This document here that you handed out shows interest being charged on the first piece for for 18 months.
So, yeah, I was mistaken.
And if I can just say a little bit more, where it talks about purchase price, I can see kind of some not clear understanding about where, if that first piece of property does get charged or not. Because the part where it talks about the interest starts with the buyer shall purchase the second parcel, and then it talks about the interest. So I can understand where there might be some confusion on whether that interest applies to the first piece or not. So
okay.
I don't know which is correct, but
it would, the latter, I mean, what you see on here is correct. I mean, and while the ordering of, what the ordering of the sentences, as you pointed out in Section 2 of the purchase agreement, could lead one to wonder if that's after the second parcel. The sentence itself is actually fairly plain, and that interest accrues from the effective date, which is the date of the signing of this purchase agreement. So, it may make more sense for that sentence to have been, before the one it's behind.
And is it really common that you would pay what do they call it, the commission on the interest amount as well as the originally agreed upon purchase price?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily common that you have such a deal where interest is accruing on the price.
Right.
It's whatever you close out of that day, that's what you're paying commission on, so that would be common. That whatever cash is being exchanged for the land, that's what you're paying commission on. I don't want to pretend that this whole proposal is not without risks, and we've obviously been our goal from the beginning, and the attorney's goal is to make sure that we have to be very cynical. We've been forced to be that way, that it is possible that Parcel 1 closes and they either start developing or they finish that development, and the Parcel 2 and 3 don't ever get finished for whatever number of reasons caused this situation we're in to begin with. I think that there are safeguards within there to help us alleviate concern about that, not the least of which is that right up front we have to agree and sign off on obviously the site plan, which is going to come through this process, but how the lands will be divided, and because we've been concerned to make sure that somebody doesn't chop off the best piece and leave us hanging with the rest. We would have to approve up front the plan for doing land divisions, and we'd have to prove up front how the RUs would be allocated. And in doing that, while it's not dictated or prescribed quite yet, when we do that, obviously we're going to look at it through the lens of making sure that should we be left holding undeveloped lands, are the number of RUs and the way it's divided still have value that we could potentially recover in. That's not decided here, but that's something that we will have to decide later on in approving the plan, how they would divide it, how they develop it, how they divide it, to make sure that if we're left with a partial development, that anything that we're left with in the way of land and RUs could be, we could still sell that someday and still...
Do we have any kind of preliminary plan what he's planning on doing there?
Not really, because, one, they're extremely interested in the target market analysis that we're doing. They're going to do their own market analysis, of course, but they're very intrigued by the study that we're doing about what the residential market's looking for in this area. And so it's mentioned in here that they're going to want to see that report to help them make some decisions. We've talked before at this table that, you know, they definitely have a bread and butter product that they've done in many other areas, but that's not all they've done. They've done soup to nuts on higher density or higher end stuff, so they're very comfortable with the idea of doing, when they looked at the concept plan for Newberry Place, they thought that was an interesting plan, and if the market suggested it could support something like that, they could move forward with something like that. So something similar, but maybe more tweaked to today's market.
Is there any trigger that ends the inspection period, or is it run for 6 months no matter what? I mean, say the thing's going quicker than, you know, maybe they get all their inspection stuff done in 4 months.
Yeah, I think it's just 6 months period.
Okay.
They can, if they begin the site planning process, that triggers the beginning of the approval period.
Okay.
In Section 7, but I guess...
And then it doesn't, in the approval period, it doesn't ever talk of them submitting for site plan on parcels 2 or 3, the way it does in 1, for 1.
Which,
I thought it said it had to be done after 7 years from the original site plan.
That's the end of the...
That's the deferment on the assessment.
The assessments.
But it's not necessarily a period by which you have to have a land use approval.
So in the first couple sentences, it says, at the end of the, no later than the expiration of the period, the buyer, that term of the agreed buyer shall begin the site planning process with the seller for parcel 1. Yada, 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 yada. Then it talks about, you know, parcel 2 and parcel 3, that if they've gotten their, you know, permits and land use, you know, that then they may elect to you know, move on to 2 and 3, but it doesn't ever talk about any site plan, you know, submittal for 2 or 3. I don't know if it has to. It's just something I noticed in there. And
yeah, it doesn't get as specific about what happens on those. They would, they can obviously it says they can terminate the agreement if they're not able to get land use approval. I guess would the risk or your concern be that they could completely change what happens?
Well, so no, not necessarily, but I mean that submission of the site or for site plan on the first one starts the clock ticking.
Yes.
There's nothing that starts the clock ticking for 2 or 3 other than the 12 months from the original one, right? And then it talks about extensions to that 12-month period.
Right.
You know, talks about a couple of them real concretely, and then talks that we could even extend it even more than that, and nothing ever says what starts the next 12-month time frame. If you know,
that may not be. There may be an answer then. It's just not clear to me. I'll try to find that out.
Any other questions?
My computer's
Oh.
not working.
So I got one more then, if something else. So, as I brought up early on in this, it's kind of like they're taking an option on our property. And usually when somebody takes an option on your property, they have to pay you something for it. I know they have to put in some money at the beginning, and then it goes from 50 to 100, and then that's applied to the first sale. Is there ever any more that they put in that to compensate us for that being off the market for 3 years?
No, it's basically $150,000 total, $50,000 for the first parcel, 50 and 50 for this parcel 2 and 3.
But all of which they get back if they decide not to.
Correct.
So basically, if they give you $50,000,
Right.
they buy the first one, you've basically taken, so then they got, theoretically, they've got 12 months to get through their approval process. Could get extended by 6 months and 6 months and 6 months. And then you still have it off the market, and then in the end, they don't execute any of it. You've had it off the market for without any compensation at all.
Sure. That would be a weakness in this proposal. And if that's, that's what I need to know, is if that's too much of a hurdle, what would be a solution that is more acceptable to the board?
When people have money on the line, they're apt to act, not basically sit on things. I kind of think that we ought to look at it in the form that Larry's referencing, like as if it's an option. They need to put some money up front that they're going to lose. They don't act on things.
Is that a direction the board would like to go with?
I think the concern is, it's everything looks great if things go well in the economy and their first phase, they move right along. But
is your concern more about this phase 2 and 3 versus phase 1?
Two separate issues.
Probably because, you're talking about 3 years' time, right?
Right.
And, I don't know that you could ever get to 3 years without getting anything. I don't think, unless you were willing to just keep extending and extending and extending. It seems like they would have the skin in the game of at least 50 at some point, and then have to execute the sale of the first piece right before they would get into a time that the second and third piece is that time start clicking. So say they didn't do anything at all, you could terminate after, 6 months you could terminate, right? Or is it only their termination after 6 months?
I think either side we terminate.
We can choose not to agree to the extension.
I think this is a great opportunity, and I don't, I don't want to, come up with some cockamamie thing. I'm not a land sale guy, but it's just something that has always struck me. When you take an option on a piece of property, there's usually a cost for it, and that seems like what they're doing here, and there's no costs for that being taken off the market. So, Joe has more experience with land
I don't have a
stuff
lot of
than I,
experience
but
on this end of it, but I agree. I agree with what you're saying. We have somebody here who wants to test the waters and tie up everything else And if the waters are good, he's going to go with the other stuff. If they're not, he'll walk, and then we're stuck with many months and years of keeping it off the market. And I don't think that's fair. It's, you know, and it's been an issue since the beginning. You know, because if he takes parcel 1 and he starts moving, he's got the other 2 all tied up. He doesn't have to worry about any competition coming in because he's got them tied up, and that's why he's doing that. So I think there should be some type of a consequence if he doesn't move on them.
And that's typically what happens is, you, in a regular land deal, just a straight one, when you buy something,
But in this economy, is that a deal breaker in this kind of an economy?
No, you provide earnest money, and if the inspections go through and everything's okay, and you decide, okay, all the objections, they move forward with the closing. If they choose not to do the closing, they lose their earnest money. Or the seller can force them to buy the property. It's usually one of the other options. I mean, there's typically the seller has some options because the land's unique. But in this circumstance, I think that I understand what you're saying about the economy, and maybe we may not get another property owner to come along, but I'm not without trepidation on this one because of what has happened with this parcel before. Now, Andy Giovanetti recently contacted you guys, correct? And he's interested in maybe talking to this guy or whoever the company that.
Well, he was interested in the water main extension discussion.
Right.
And we certainly let him know that there was a possible deal here, and we'd keep him in touch with each other.
This is zoned.
It's Zone CA right now.
It's Zone CA, but it was supposed to be a special planning area.
It's got a
master plan special planning area. So, again, that's pretty wide open what they can do in CA, right?
In CA?
In CA, no.
No, it's not zoned. It's just master plan.
Master plan, okay.
CA is going to be 2-acre lots.
Right. So it's going to have to be changed anyway.
I mean, not to argue both sides of this, but sometimes I like to do that. But the other part of this that I guess is different than a regular option thing is we're also the approving body of the site plan too. So, I mean, I can see they don't know what our demands might be site plan wise. So to say I'm willing to give you $50,000. And then you've got the ability to sit back here and deny my site plan, but then take my $50,000. If it were me, I'd probably have some problem with that.
I think they would have reviewed our ordinance and all that too. I think they have a pretty good idea what
They saw the pattern book.
Yeah, but they're not seeing it. And I mean, at some point, I think there's going to be a conversation on Pleasant Valley Road and improvements to Pleasant Valley Road, and you know, how's that going to go over with them? I mean, I'm just saying, if it were me, and I don't know that I'd be willing to pay you $50,000 to tell me yes or no, you like my plan, and you get to keep the $50,000. That's all I'm saying.
On the other hand, too, is like, you know, Joe, you mentioned like they get to test the waters. If the economy does go bad, the odds are we're not going to sell the property anyways in the next 3 years. You know, so, but if, you know, things are going up, we've got a developer that's interested in the property. So, again, it's a tough.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big player. This is not a small little hometown builder. This is a big player, and you want him to be successful, because there's a whole lot of other places he could be building.
In the original development proposed for this parcel, I believe there was some property that was set aside for a fire department building. Do you recall that?
There was discussion about it. It wasn't in the concept plan, but yeah, I mean, those types of recognizable benefits, you know, there's been some discussion that they may be interested in extending the water. I mean, there's a lot to be talked about. Of course, that'll be through the plan development. And I think we agreed when we looked at the letter of intent that now was not the time for that conversation, because we don't...
Well, I agree with that, but I'm just wondering if we should reserve, like, not sell 5 acres for...
I think when we do the PD process, we'll have that conversation. I think that's where we landed on that, if that's still okay.
The only thing I will say, as being involved in that PD process with the previous one, and I know a lot of those conversations happened with the group prior to my time on the Planning Commission, that you're talking about, the 5 acres, and then we started getting into discussion, and they weren't quite as willing to give up 5 acres. So I'm just saying, when you get down the road, it's
those are the
not always the easy thing to...
But it shouldn't be part of what he's the purchase agreement.
Yeah, but it could be easily part of the purchase agreement if you just say you're not selling this 5 acres.
Just out of curiosity, is there enough real estate at the new park property to put in a fire department if we needed to?
You'd have to put it way back. It's
not practical?
No, not at this point, no.
Well, even when we look at how we used to do developments and have extra things brought to the table, paving projects and such, that whole thing's going to be revisited. Because these things are so much different today.
Oh, yeah.
We say we talked about that, but what are the actuality, what are going to be the things that we can actually be objective and think that we can get?
Yeah, that was the point I was making.
Yeah, I agree. Matt, did you have any other questions?
I was just saying that I think we ought to seriously consider keeping some of the property and not selling it so we don't have to negotiate future uses like that. That's my thought. We already own it now. So.
Even if it were used in the form of a land swap in order to meet their site plan requirements. So you keep 5 acres or whatever the acreage you need. I don't know what you would need for the fire department.
Not that much.
Probably not that much. And you put it where you want it, or you keep it where you want it. And then, in the course of their site plan, if they need that portion, but there's other portion what they don't need, you work out a land swap. That's another way to handle that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've had the conversation with Adam. The location is quite flexible. They're not.
That's why. That's why you want to identify.
I just want to clarify that this conversation we're having is the exact opposite of the one we had around the letter of intent. Is that we were going to wait to try to carve out possible fire property until the PD process. So I want to clearly.
If that were the case, we were apologizing, but now we're talking
offer on the table.
Yeah, we have an offer, a real offer on the table. One, that's one. Number two, there's significant risk to us, I think, that's been raised by Larry in terms of how this could go south fairly quick and how the property would be basically off the market while this guy's testing the waters or determining he can't go forward with phase 2 and 3, but phase 1 he'll keep, and so I don't know. I don't have any.
That piece is separate from the fire piece,
right?
And it definitely was what we talked about. And if this didn't go far enough, I will. I think the date at which the first $50,000 becomes non-refundable changed from the original letter of intent, but not much else did. And if that paying for the option is still a concern, let's definitely talk about what that looks like, what your board would be comfortable with. When it comes to the fire piece, I would be frustrated to take that back into the conversation this late in the game.
You could bring it up as a possible.
I've put them on, when we started talking to them, that was brought up.
Okay.
All the things that could possibly come up in future discussions I would talk about. The fire piece, Pleasant Valley Road, and water main extension, all those things have been told to them as those could be a part of the PD conversation.
James, did they agree to pay for half of the commission?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, correct me if I'm wrong in reading this, but it looks like the $50,000 earnest money, if in the inspection period for, if it goes past 6 months, we get to keep that $50,000.
If they don't go forward with the...
Correct.
If they don't go forward with the purchase.
If they go forward with the purchase, it gets applied to it.
Right.
Right.
But if they want to sit on for 7 months, we get $50,000.
Yes.
We would, unless we were to agree to extend it, or if there was some reason on our own part that causes the delay. I could see what is his remedies there.
It's not spelled out, but of course we could amend or agree to do that at a later time if we wanted to. It's not provided for. 6 months is a pretty healthy...
No, is he supposed to get a site plan and all that?
No.
Then the approval period is after the inspection period.
And that's a year long.
So, yeah.
Why is he giving so much 6 months to get permits and things like that?
Well, that isn't even, that's just inspection.
Inspection. Why does he need that many months?
That's what they've asked for, and it's during this time that they want to see the market study, and...
Still has probably another couple months till that's complete, right? You said October?
We just got the first draft.
No, we got the preliminary, but, I mean...
Usually
it should be done in a few weeks.
90 days, even in a commercial.
They haven't stated the reason why they've asked for 6 months.
I just don't want to bait and switch, the idea that they hold on to it, and then they've got another buyer out there that they're grooming, that they're going to flip it to. It's just
So I've heard both sides of the idea of asking for more earnest money and a harder trigger on where it becomes non-refundable. Is that something the board as a whole wants to see changed?
It is non-refundable right now.
They basically free.
The first $50,000 is after 6 months. It's after that it gets a little, not fuzzy, but they have a lot more leeway on their end, and they could have the property tied up, and there's not necessarily anything more into it that is guaranteed.
So I guess I'll just offer this. So I guess I would like to see there be some other earnest money after the first edition, after the first sale. Because we're talking about, another year and then another year, and then there's no more money that they could possibly lose.
That's the biggest part.
So that still gives them the first part of the project to test the water, see if it works, and then they'll either say yes or no, and if they say no, I'm not saying you have to, say, okay, you bought the first one, you got to give us an extra $50,000, and you don't ever get that back. But it seemed like you'd want
another mechanism to default back to the township.
Right. Well, and there's no motivation for them to execute 2 or 3. I mean, they don't have any money in the game.
No skin in the game.
Would it be? I don't know if you have a certain dollar amount in mind, but perhaps we can look, if you look at the interest accrual on the purchase price, I mean, we have the list price, we basically have some agreement or tentative agreement with them to kind of pay the cost of holding that price over time and waiting on the closing. If they were to walk away from it, I guess arguably that's what we're out, or so to speak, that if they were to care for each year that it gets delayed, that they're paying the interest on that, or as the...
Well, that's not a bad, how would, try and put that in, how would you...
What the attorneys are for.
I see.
What's your thought, Joe?
On TV.
Huh? What's your thought?
Well, I understand all of what you're saying, Larry, and all the discussion about if they don't make it, here we are stuck with the land and no deposits and all that stuff. But a builder of this caliber coming into our township, I haven't seen yet. I haven't seen it. It's always been hometown people or smaller developers in the nearby neighbor areas. Nothing of this size. If this guy comes in and doesn't make it, what makes you think that we're going to be able to sell that property to anybody else? This guy has got more products. and more ways of marketing those products than many of the builders in our area would even dream of having. And if he can't make it there with the product he's got working with the township, of course, you're not going to sell that property anyways. You're not. And if he walks away, I don't think you're going to get another big developer coming in here for a long time either, because there's going to be a reason why he walked away with somebody of his size. That's the way I see it. So he's got to succeed there. He's got to succeed for himself and for us. Or else we're going to be holding on for that line for a lot longer.
All I can think of is just that Latson corridor there right off of 59.
Pardon me?
Latson Road and 59 just going south. And I just see...
But that was different because that was already developed. And what's happening in the county is all those developed lots are now disappeared. So we have raw land. We got people coming looking for the raw land now, and that's what we have here. Totally different. Because a lot of those builders that came in after the recession off of Latson Road bought those lots for pennies on the dollar. And that's how they got those houses up. We didn't have that luxury here because we didn't have the developed lots.
But,
which is okay, because there's a lot of losses.
There's a lot of loss.
There's a lot of loss.
And product, yeah. I'll be honest with you, I'm not impressed with that product over there.
Well, the latest one is the one that's right on the corner behind the drugstore, and that was raw land, and that is a certain kind of development. That is a development that they call snowbird development, and that's basically for retired people that want to be in Michigan in the summer, and then they leave it and they go down to Florida or warm state during the winter. It's called the snowbird development. That's what's going on behind the CVS off of Latson and 59 right now.
I do just want to acknowledge something. There is a somewhat of a dead end on this, in that from the time that this agreement is signed, they have 7 years. And I don't know if that makes us feel better, but it can't go on forever, too many more years. Basically, at the end of 7 years, they got to start making the assessment payments. So there is somewhat of a trigger there. I don't know if that's shorter than you were worried about, but that there is that built in.
On the unsold ones?
On the whole thing.
If they've closed on the property, I mean, if they haven't closed on the property in 7 years,
well, if they haven't,
you're just going to leave.
Oh, yes, right. No, that's what I'm saying, is that it isn't, they couldn't tie it up for more than 7 years, I guess. I'm not pretending like that's a gift to you.
Can they sell that? Could they purchase this property and turn around and sell it?
Yeah, whoever buys it's still going to have to deal with the township and what they build there.
And when they do, the successor would have to pay off the assessment. So all successors has to pay off the full balance of the outstanding assessments immediately. So I don't know that there's necessarily a strong where somebody's going to have to be willing to pay twice what they're paying for.
Can I ask another clarification question? In our letter from June, when we provided comments, we indicated that we wanted the definitive agreement to be clear that they were obligated to close on all 3 parcels, but we didn't say exactly when. Well, I understand that they're going to be closing on parcels 1, 2, and 3 at 3 different years. Is this true?
Yeah, it would be over a number of years that they would do the 3 closings.
So if take parcel 3, which they close in February 28th of 2019, who's going to continue to pay the fees for the SAD in that period of time?
So what we have been doing is we've been making that payment, of course.
So we're going to continue making that.
Well, not the way this is structured. I mean, the way we've been doing it is really kind of taking the money out of our left pocket, putting it in our right pocket to make the payments. Based on this deferment, we would leave those SADs as is. The unpaid amounts would stay there and accrue interest on the assessment. And the only thing we wouldn't do is we wouldn't turn them over to the county as delinquent. it's part of the agreement here, is we'd keep them on the books as having not been paid and they're accruing interest, but we wouldn't make those payments like we have been. Instead, what would happen is the sewer fund, instead of making the payment for the assessment, ends up transferring monies to the bond to make the bond payment, which just sort of skips the middleman. I don't know if I'm...
That cash flow all works?
Right, I mean, it's the same thing. Instead of paying it to that, we're just transferring it, doing an extra transfer to make the bond payment, but, you know, it gets made up to us in the long run when they ultimately get paid. I don't know how well I've explained.
So I was correct in saying that we're going to continue to pay the SAD fees?
Well, we would not pay the SAD. The SAD bill would come and we would not pay it. And it would be sit in the assessment on the property would sit there unpaid and would go multiple years as unpaid with the balance accruing interest. We just would not turn it over as delinquent. We would keep it there.
Because we hold title.
Yeah, right. And then whenever the land's divided, assessment's distributed, the successor, when they buy it, they get the bill. This is the outstanding balance on that REU, plus the accrued interest for all the...
Plus interest.
Plus the interest that's accrued while it went deferred.
How are you planning on doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just because you still got to make the bond payment.
But my point is, how are you planning on, if you don't have control of that property, so the balance, when they close on that property, they accept all the assessments at that point, too.
Correct. And through the agreement, we're allowing them to not make the payment until such time as they sell it to a successor, and then the payment has to be, the outstanding balance has to be paid in full, or 7 years, whichever is shorter.
But that has to be them doing that. So it doesn't matter. We don't care. Even whatever they do, I mean,
as long as they can't walk away from it after 7 years.
It's a timing issue, because it's kind of like, why would I care whether he sells it, he's able to subdivide it and sell it too, and spread that cost to an individual parcel?
That's not our concern.
It shouldn't be our concern.
It really isn't, but we're recognizing by structuring it this way, it allows them to avoid the carrying costs.
Okay. Well, okay, so we're saying basically they don't have to pay us until they get something, they get a parcel sold.
Yes.
What happens if that could go on in infinitum?
Well, 7 years is the ultimate deadline.
Okay. What happens after 7 years? Do they agree to a lien for all the full assessments if they haven't been able to sell them?
The lien's always there the whole time, but for the grant of a deferment on those payments for a period of time. But after the 7 years, yeah. Got to make them. If they don't make them, it's a lien, tax foreclosure, the whole...
And so we're back to square one.
Correct.
Basically,
we got a few dollars in the middle. A few dollars in the middle.
I understand. I understand both our sides of the coin.
For a simple farmer, this sales agreement is too complicated for me, and I need to rely on an attorney or someone to say it's a wise thing to do.
I'm anxious to sell the property. I think it's the right thing to do, but just something about this right now, either I'm not smart enough.
Well, an attorney is not going to tell you, they're not going to advise you
To sell or not to sell.
They're not going to advise you on the decision of whether to sell or not to sell. What the attorney is going to tell you is, okay, this is what the seller is willing to, or buyer is willing to agree to. What are you going to want? What's your intent? And I'll put that down in writing. That's what he's there. Right. And then he will say, these are your risks. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to assume those risks. There is an attorney that will tell you, this is a good deal. They do that, and they're in trouble. You know.
So we've done a lot of talking out both sides of our mouth tonight.
Right.
Good job. And
it's getting late.
Yeah, we don't...
so you're going to bring this back?
But they'd certainly like to see the purchase agreement approved at the next meeting. If there are reasons we think that is not reasonable or feasible, I need to know that. If we think that's too soon, I need to know that. But at some point, we got to get to the heart of what's acceptable or not acceptable, and I haven't quite heard that yet.
Bill, do you think it would be advisable for us to schedule a special meeting to talk about this further?
Yes.
I mean, we need to talk amongst ourselves.
I can anticipate us having a special meeting on this. This is a very big issue, very important on a number of fronts.
Yes.
And just to make sure, when we got it kind of laid out here tonight, you did a nice job with this. You see where we're headed.
Would it be worthwhile to have Holbier at that meeting?
Or via conference call, maybe.
Or via conference call?
Available.
We can. I don't know, for the discussion we've had tonight, I don't know that you would add a value, because all he's going to do is tell me what you want to do, and I'll turn it into language. So, because I can just as well take that as him listening to it. But.
Does everybody know your schedule for next week right now?
Yeah, Tuesday's open.
Tuesday's not going to work next week. Wednesday will work.
Don't we have a hero board?
That's on the 27th.
Ours is on 27th? Okay. No, I was just curious when the hero board...
Next Wednesday, 6 o'clock work for everybody?
I think so.
So far, so good.
Tentatively plan it then for next Wednesday, 6 o'clock, to continue discussion.
That's August 13th.
Yes.
I could do 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock? Okay.
August 13th, 6 p.m.
Would we have to go into closed session or not?
Can't. Although there is a bill that's been introduced that would allow us for the sale of property. Somebody's introduced a bill to add that to the closed session.
Bill numbers that.
Yeah, it was in MTA recently.
Okay, let's keep moving then. If there's nothing else on that, we'll do that a week from tomorrow, a week from tonight.
Did we say 6?
6 o'clock. Okay, James, we still have a couple more to try to get through here. You got police protection report?
You have my report. I'm not going to try to pretend to have a productive conversation on that this time.
House Bill 5706.
I put it on there basically. I guess I sort of requested it. I thought it was interesting that there's a bill sponsored to prohibit the collection from those injured and the first responders responding and then sending a bill and being able to collect. I think this guy probably, I'm trying to remember the bill, but basically we couldn't charge a fee for out-of-towners for
We bill. If somebody's in an accident out of 23 and they live in Livonia, we bill them. We bill the insurance company.
And the insurance company pays it. And I don't know what prompted it. I got the impression from Adam that particular bill probably won't see the light of day. It was probably sponsored by a constituent that got upset because they received a bill from a township or something, But that's typically how it happens. And they'll sponsor a bill knowing full well it's not going to see the light of day. But I think that if we ought to watch it, and if it becomes starts to see some traction, but I think we should, maybe at the very least, we ought to send a letter, and it could be James or Bill could send a letter to Cindy Demby and Joe Hume and let them know that, this is a bill that the township opposes. I know MTA opposes it as well.
Adam's talked to him this morning. His belief is it's going to go nowhere. But
I didn't think it's going to go nowhere. But sometimes I think it's just to go on record, because I've heard too many times from legislators, nobody ever talks to us. Nobody ever sends us anything. And it
could be a short and sweet letter.
Yeah, a short and sweet letter that just says, we oppose this, bill for what it stands for. We treat people we treat out-of-towners and
it would be interesting if we even had some statistics from the fire department, how many
Oh, there's a lot.
How many accidents are, especially with 59 and 23?
Oh, there's a lot.
Residents.
There's a lot. I mean, because it could be somebody from Osceola.
Do you have that report?
They give us a report every month about the collectibles.
I think this could be a story. You should look into this.
Why I'm still
Is it?
Seriously?
seriously, this is why
Why did you say something? We would have brought it first.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, you should talk to is Adam Carroll. He's our chief. He's our chief.
Are you
Fire
telling me I'm
chief.
sitting here and you want me to go talk to someone who's not here? A good point.
Okay, so James draft a letter
Yeah,
on behalf of
something
the board
have your
and send it to Joe Hune, Cindy Demby.
Well, actually, I mean, I would, why? I mean, nothing's going to happen in 2 months. Why don't you wait until
Right, I think we should
the new
wait to-
representatives get in there?
Well, I think
they're out of the
new
gate
bills.
that we're opposed to.
All the bills they don't get
Cindy's
passed.
not going to do anything.
It's got to be reintroduced next
It's got to
session.
be reintroduced.
I'd wait till November or December to
Well, lame duck's always risk too.
Right.
and welcome to the legislature. We're not.
I mean,
proposing this.
you've seen emails I've sent up there before about goofy legislation that give my 2 cents and be the end of it. Is that?
Yes, on behalf of the board.
You could do that, too.
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
Yeah.
As simple as that as an email.
We discussed it at a board
Yeah,
meeting.
we discussed it at the board meeting.
Yeah.
We had added this William Bowles, that bill.
The fact
Okay.
that Joe Hune represents, I shouldn't say represents, he sits on the insurance committee.
That a Freudian
He may be, who knows?
Okay, we're still going forward with number 12 tonight?
I presume we'll skip that if the board prefers.
I think we ought to wait till Kathy's here.
Well,
Can I ask James one question before we adjourn, if we can adjourn?
Well, what are we going to do with, is it on his review thing, or no?
No. But
Okay.
I think that before we adjourn, that's all I'm asking.
Okay, so we're tabling this until our next meeting.
Well, we're getting together next Wednesday at 6.
We could add this as an agenda item.
We got the police protection report, we got this, do we want to try to see what of those, all 3 of them, and see what we
We can
get
put them
done
on
next
there.
Wednesday?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's why. That's why
Okay.
we've already delayed this one.
And we've talked about the purchase agreement quite a bit, so you might be surprised that after by that.
Surprise.
Okay, so we'll have the police protection, sewer property, and then the evaluation of the manager in closed session.
All right.
Larry, you'll have that posted? Okay. 6 o'clock next Wednesday. And Joe, you had something else you wanted to talk about tonight?
I was just, how does and I know you have explained it, but not in a lot of detail, how does the personal property tax issue that was approved last night affect the township as far as revenues?
The industrial and commercial personal property taxes that are now exempt is less than 1% of our taxable value. So it's a very small amount, and through this legislation as passed, we're going to get most of it back anyway. So it's so negligible, it wasn't really worth spending as much energy as the cities were on the conversation, but for us, it's a small piece of what we do, and we're going to see it back. So
It's really not effective.
yeah, it's not a huge difference to us.
Yeah.
The MTA supported it.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, right. That was MTA and Michigan Municipal League, and
Yeah. Okay.
If there's nothing further this evening, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion by Trustee Jermaine, second by Trustee Harper. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.